In the latter half of the 19th century, the economic boom sparked by the Industrial Revolution takes hold in eastern Canada, primarily the industry-based provinces of Ontario and Quebec. As the country moves into the 20th century, the construction of the world's longest Cantilever Bridge stands as a tribute to technological achievement and economic promise in the province of Quebec. But before it can be completed, tragedy will transform the Quebec Bridge into a memorial to lives lost in the name of progress. The first international rail line between the state of Maine and the province of Quebec is established in 1852. Running from Portland to Montreal, the twin rails become pipelines of economic prosperity between the two countries. Yet, ironically, the province's capital, Quebec City, is cut off from rail line opportunities by the geographical barrier of the St. Lawrence River.
At that time, the trade between the province of Quebec and, for that matter, the city of Quebec and the northeastern states, Maine, Vermont, New York, was flourishing, and there was a need for quick transportation of goods and services to the states and back.
Québec le perdait.
Quebec was losing out. The authorities in Quebec City asked an American engineer to come and study the situation. He arrived at the conclusion that they had no choice. They had to build a bridge so that the trains could cross from the North Shore in order for Quebec City to continue to develop.
In 1887, the newly formed Quebec Bridge and Railway Company begins soliciting preliminary design plans from various bridge-building firms. The consultant on the project is one of North America's leading engineers, Theodore Cooper. In his late 60s, Cooper has had a long and brilliant career building bridges throughout the United States. Of all the plans submitted, Cooper recommends the cantilever design proposed by the Phoenix Bridge Company of Pennsylvania, a design patterned after the Forth Bridge in Scotland.
Il voulait, avant de prendre sa retraite, donner son nom à une
Before
œuvre
retiring, Theodore wanted the Quebec Bridge to be his crowning achievement. This was why he took on the construction of the Quebec Bridge. Mr. Cooper was a proud and ambitious man.
To cut costs, Cooper revises the original design by moving the support piers closer to shore, making them less expensive than piers built in deeper water, and shaving an entire year off construction. Yet many speculate that the revision is motivated by something more than simple economics.
Comme M. Cooper voulait faire du Pont de Québec le pont
Mr. Cooper, as the consulting engineer, wanted to make the Quebec Bridge the longest. He therefore made his first and most important decision as consulting engineer to make the bridge 1,800 feet instead of 1,600 feet.
Construction on the bridge begins in the spring of 1904, and by the summer of 1907, the bridge is nearly half completed. There is a strong sense of pride felt by those who work the steel girders high above the St. Lawrence River. Most of these men come from the nearby Caughnawaga Reserve and have a reputation for being some of the best steelworkers in the world.
Si on parle des résidents de Caughnawaga.
When you speak of the Caughnawaga, you should say that they are very good at working with high altitudes. They do not have vertigo, and this is why we find many on the Quebec Bridge.
The money was great compared to anywhere. Money was delicious, you know. That's the only way to say it, because when you got nothing, or you're working for $1 a day, when you're winding up, you're getting $10 a day. Hey, that was a lot of money.
On dit que la plupart des ouvriers
The majority of the workers wanted to work on the construction of one of the biggest bridges ever. Of course, people had their fears, but whenever someone expressed a concern, there was always someone to reassure them.
Il y avait toujours quelqu'un pour les rassurer.
By the summer of 1907, workers need more reassurance than ever, as many begin to suspect that there are problems with the bridge's construction. On June 15th, an inspecting engineer discovers that the alignment of two girders is off by 1/4 of an inch. On August 6th, bending is detected in the bridge's lower support members during a routine inspection by Cooper's on-site consultant, Norman McClure.
What had happened was the dead load of the bridge was underestimated, and the stresses in the members would have been much above what was acceptable.
News of the problem reaches Theodore Cooper in New York. Cooper immediately contacts John Sterling Deans, head engineer of the Phoenix Bridge Company, demanding an explanation.
Ce dernier avait répondu, c'est pas surprenant puisque lorsque le métal est parti.
He responded that this wasn't surprising, as when the metal left Phoenixville, the beams were already crooked. As they were already crooked, it wasn't strange that the structure had crooked beams.
Despite company assurances, workers on the bridge can't ignore what they can see with their own eyes. Then, on August 28, 1907, McClure finds evidence that girders have shifted over the weekend.
When I first measured the 9L chord of the anchor arm, it was only 3/4 of an inch out of line. Now it is 2 1/4 inches. Their present shape is undoubtedly due to the stress they are now receiving.
Among those convinced that the bridge is failing are D.B. Haley and his partner George Cook. Testing his own theory, Haley draws a chalk mark on the bent member at the end of work on the 28th.
I said I will put a mark on that, and if it is any worse tomorrow, I am gone from here.
McClure is dispatched to New York to persuade Cooper in person of the severity of the situation.
The resident engineer had stopped all construction and sent a telegram to Cooper that unless we hear from you, there will be no further construction on the bridge.
But incredibly, work is allowed to continue in McClure's absence, authorized by Edward A. Hoare, chief engineer of the Quebec Bridge Company.
There was a superintendent who went to Mr. Hoare, who was the chief engineer of the local company, who said that, all right, you can go ahead with the construction. And they suspended span further. The result was there was more load.
For the workers on the Quebec Bridge, August the 29th breaks with overwhelming anxiety. Some choose to turn a deaf ear to the rumors, such as Rivet Gang boss Alexandre Beauvais. Others, like Thomas Montour, are reluctant to work on the bridge at all, until he is persuaded otherwise by his older brother Angus. At their usual post at the end of the bridge, Haley and Cook await the arrival of the scuttle train known as the Traveller. The Traveller hauls steel from the fabrication yard at Chaudelet to the bridge. Almost 20 meters above, Thomas Montour makes his way to his station at the highest point of the south span. Alexandre Beauvais and Angus Montour take their position behind the erector gangs, not far from the now infamous chords of 8 and 9L. In New York, Cooper arrives at his Manhattan office to find Norman McClure waiting for him.
On voyait à travers la structure des signes qui auraient dû éveiller des inquiétudes.
And there were obvious signs of weakening in the interior of the structure. Theodore Cooper realized the seriousness of the situation. After a few minutes of discussion, they sent a telegram. At this point, McClure wrote that the workers must cease all work.
Lorsque M. McClure a quitté Québec la veille, les ouvriers avaient cessé le travail.
The telegram is sent to John Deans at the Phoenix Bridge Company. Although he is aware that men are working on the bridge, Deans fails to forward the message to the bridge site, stubbornly clinging to his conviction that the steel members were bent when they left the fabrication yards.
If they had stopped construction and gone back, they could have possibly strengthened the compression arms of the bridge, and the bridge could have been saved. But it's unfortunate that events took place in such a way that the telegrams went back and forth and there was no answer.
Apprehension on the bridge begins to dissolve at 5:30 when the whistle blows, signaling the men on the bridge to put their tools away for the day. In just 15 minutes, they will be sent home, but most will never make it. August 29th, 1907. The 5:30 whistle signals some 100 laborers on the Quebec Bridge to put their tools away. But the 5:45 whistle that will send them home never blows. The sound that replaces it is much more terrifying.
At
5:37 p.m., you could hear a loud, dreadful crash. Everyone thought it was an earthquake, but it was the Quebec Bridge that had collapsed.
Un grand bruit, ça quand le pont a tombé, le bruit.
The noise of the fall could be heard as far as 45 kilometers away. Everyone ran to see what had happened, and then everyone saw the pieces of steel. An apocalyptic event. Very, very horrifying thing to see.
The bend in Chord 9L has finally given way, sending 70 million tons of steel and the men working on it into the St. Lawrence River. At the moment of collapse, Alexander Beauvais stands right at the breaking point.
I was right inside the cord. As soon as I felt it break, I made a grab for the plate.
Angus Montour, however, is on the other side of the gap, riding the descending bridge into the waters below. With no time to think, Thomas Montour jumps off the bridge, plummeting towards the river 300 feet below. D.B. Haley and George Cook find themselves in the water before they can even perceive what has happened.
The first thing I knew, I caught myself going through the air. I was in the water before the noise came.
Horrified witnesses rush to the site, while men trapped in the twisted steel plead vainly for help. Those near the shore who survive the fall are pinned under the massive bridge members in rising tide waters, with waves half a meter high.
Many of them were not hit by the falling debris. They were simply trapped in the debris, and the river was rising, and unfortunately these people got drowned with their relatives and friends watching from the bank of the river.
The water's coming in and men are asking to be killed before they drown to death. Some maybe just clothes holding them, but the point is they can't get out. They're pinned.
Knocked unconscious on impact, Thomas Montour comes to and manages to drift a quarter-mile downriver before being rescued. The body of his brother Angus is never recovered, presumably trapped beneath a mass of steel. D.B. Haley is rescued by a passing boat, but his partner George Cook is not so lucky. Like so many others, his body is never recovered. Of the 100 laborers on the bridge that afternoon, 76 are dead.
Parmi les 76 victimes, on dit il y avait 26
Among the 76 victims, there were 26 Quebecois who were killed. From those, 21 lived nearby. There were 32 Indians who came from near the bridge, and there were 17 Americans who were engineers or people who had prestigious positions in the Phoenixville Bridge Company.
News of the tragedy reaches the Kanawage Indian Reserve, where most of the bridge workers live.
Parmi tous les Indiens qui étaient au pont,
In fact, among all the Indians who were at the bridge, most of them had been killed. There were 33 altogether, and I believe only 8 were buried in the local cemetery in Caughnawaga. Many stayed on the site, along with all the other laborers that were never found.
A royal commission into the collapse places the blame at the feet of both the Quebec and Phoenixville Bridge Companies and Theodore Cooper.
Alors, il y a eu la commission royale d'enquête.
There was a royal commission reported the 10th of March, 1910, and from that moment on, the Quebec Bridge and Railway Company was ruined.
As for Theodore Cooper, His career ends in close association with one of the most catastrophic bridge disasters in the world.
Theodore Cooper
obviously thought that the Quebec Bridge was going to be the crowning achievement of his career, but it became the failure of his life. Mr. Cooper died a couple of months later.
Despite the setback caused by the tragic collapse of the Quebec Bridge, the governments of Canada and Quebec forge ahead with plans for a new bridge to be constructed by the newly formed St. Lawrence Bridge Company. Over the next 2 years, remnants of the old bridge are removed from the St. Lawrence River. Construction on the second bridge begins in 1912. The bridge remains a cantilever structure with one distinguishing difference.
In the first design, the bridge was to be continuous from both sides, meeting in the middle. In the second design, what they decided was the suspension span would be built separately. And then they bring the central span, which was about 150 feet long, lift it up from the launches and simply place it in the center of the bridge.
By the summer of 1916, the two arms of the bridge are completed. All that remains is for the central span to be floated downriver and lifted into place with hydraulic jacks. Only the very best workers are chosen for this task. This time, the men of the Caughnawaga Reserve have opted to stay home. But the ghosts of the first attempt at raising the Quebec Bridge still haunt the handful of men about to make the second. Among them is Alexandre Barbeau. Likewise, W.B. Fortune, head engineer of the St. Lawrence Bridge Company, insists on overseeing every aspect of the raising of the bridge to ensure that the fate of the second bridge won't mirror the first.
Le 11 septembre 1916 avait été choisi.
September 11th, 1916 was chosen for the day where the tide would be high enough to raise the central span to the level of the bridge and attach it to the iron posts. With the aid of hydraulic pumps, they lifted the span 2 feet at a time.
Et à l'aide de pompes hydrauliques, on la soulève de 2 pieds à la fois.
One of the jacks on the bridge failed, and as the jack failed, of course, the span fell into the river.
Il y avait des personnes qui étaient sur les cantilevers de chaque côté. Et lorsque la travée centrale...
There are also people on the cantilevers on both sides that were shaken off, and there are many who were on the cantilevers that were thrown over the security rails and fell into the water.
Among those rescued from the river is Alexandre Barbeau.
Au moment où la travée centrale est tombée,
right when the span fell, he was on the central span, filling his pipe. The people in his family still tell the story that Mr. Barbeau fell right to the bottom of the river, and a few seconds later was rescued by a government boat.
Casualties in the second tragedy total 13. Yet again, in the face of tragedy, the quest to build the bridge continues.
There was never the option of not having a bridge. Despite this failure, I don't believe that people thought for a moment to not build the bridge.
The next day, the St. Lawrence Bridge Company publicly announces its plans to continue building the bridge. The company assumes full responsibility for the failure and compensates the families of the victims. A year later, the second attempt at raising the span is made, this time successfully.
Alors, la complétion du Pont de Québec le 20 septembre 1917.
The Quebec Bridge was completed on the 20th of September 1917. When the bridge was done, there were hundreds of boats who raised a flag from the bridge as a signal, and all boats sounded their horns. They say that the laborers jumped into one another's arms, and they shouted and carried the engineers.
On dit que les ouvriers sont sautés dans les bras les uns des autres. On a porté les ingénieurs en triomphe.
In the end, The world's largest cantilever bridge costs $25 million and claims 89 lives. Yet after over 80 years, the Quebec Bridge has been studied by engineers more than any other bridge in the world.
Amongst the things that we learned was that we have to be very careful about the design process. We must estimate all of the loads as accurately as is possible. So if we were to build a similar bridge today, I don't think we would have the same problem with the knowledge that we have now.
La leçon à tirer en premier, la plus importante leçon, c'est que
the biggest lesson, the most important lesson, is that you can never leave a project of such magnitude in the hands of one person. Even if they were incredibly confident in the abilities of Theodore Cooper, they shouldn't have put all the responsibility on the shoulders of one person.
But for the people of the Caughnawaga Reserve, all of whom lost at least one relative in the disaster, the Quebec Bridge offers a different lesson.
It didn't take long for the people says, well, says if any Indians ever go back out, he says, well, they're not going in a big group like they did. So this won't happen again.